Bernard de Montreal. Book Beyond the Mind. Chapter 16. The Astral Connection. The astral body is primarily responsible for the sensorial functions of consciousness. Its secondary task is to glimpse the astral world through a universal symbolism experienced in the dream state. The astral body is the most important vehicle in the perception of self-consciousness, while the mental body remains only partially activated until the self is made aware of the psychic world of the mind. At this time he discovers his mental relationship with universal psychic territories that make up the etheric plane of consciousness, and the energy field through which interdimensional civilizations travel in their systemic order. Contact with advanced thought systems will follow the transmutation of astral consciousness. The mind cannot experience higher mental communication unless astral consciousness has been revealed, and the ego made aware of the primary laws of thought that structure its link with interdimensional worlds. Contact with other mind planes through the manipulation of the astral form has been a reclining experience throughout history. The evolution of consciousness will demonstrate that the astral displacement of mind energy is no terminal proof of such experience, but simply a taste of what conscious contact with interdimensional space will be in time. It may be self-serving to think that astral contact with other levels of consciousness is final and absolute, when it is simply a test of human character put into psychic situation in order to determine the degree of emotional reaction experienced at this level before full etheric and physical contact can, if ever, be established. While the astral nature of the experience does take place in actual psychic terms, the subject remains bound to the cosmic law of disinformation that accompanies all human contact with other levels of life, until the mind has been freed from its astral connection. Destiny does not lie within human civilization alone. As we know it, civilization is a limited sketch of evolutionary life that extends much further than we are led to believe, or can even imagine. Interdimensional contact cannot take place on the basis of our present psychological makeup and knowledge. The mind territory must first expand and stabilize for higher systems of thought to imprint themselves on the psyche to make it possible for the ego, through unhindered perceptions, to increase its understanding. The mind must be depolluted or deastralized to become an accessible continuum to higher forms of intelligence. If not, any form of psychic connection is subject to disinformation in accordance with the systemic laws of programmed evolution. The astral connection is a tentative link with intelligences of other planes. It is fraught with lies and deceptions that can only be overcome through the knowledge of its laws. The etheric counterpart of the mind is the consummate plane that will make objective understanding of systemic reality possible. Life does not begin on the physical plane. It only evolves there for reasons of development of its physical, astral, and mental forms. Life as we know it is a necessary step towards immortality. The permanent bond with consummate consciousness devoid of astral veils and free from the experiential karma of the soul. Cellular consciousness must be raised to incorporate the physical and psychic makeup, the elements of the life force of which man is an integral part in other dimensions and from which he originates. The astral connection must be broken before he gains full control of his energy field and can apply his conscious will. Total integration cannot take place until he has learned to sever his link with the astral planes that divert his energy and make him deviate towards lower instincts that color his subjective thoughts. Advanced human experience will make a complete reversal in the life flow as it regains control over its inner dimensions. The astral connection is so strong, it prevents the self from connecting with his own source. He is reduced to the life of a puppet, incapable of dealing with the reality of his psychic makeup, the subtle material of which he is part. The next age will see civilization, as we know it, crumble under the weight of disbelief of the thought systems that sustained humanity for thousands of years. We have lived for too long apart from our psychic reality, swept away by the astral influences of our civilized illusions. The mind must be upgraded in vibration through the fragmentation of its astrality. This reversal of fortune will affect all levels of life on the planet, from individual to the collective governing bodies. The fabric of consciousness will be stretched to its limits, in order to free man's inner potential to connect with the etheric or higher mental dimensions of systemic reality. Understanding the astral connection will lead to the understanding of consciousness, allowing the ego to separate its self-reality from its egoic sensitivity. It will increase the relationship between man and his source at the mental level, and decrease his dependency on thought systems that have the power to develop his intellect, but are unable to free his consciousness. The level of awareness of the mind can only be raised through the knowledge that the astral connection distorts self-reality. It divides consciousness and leads man to believe that his reality is a byproduct of his thoughts when in fact, it is a byproduct of higher thought systems that have not yet been integrated by the lower self or intellect. This explains why ideas are often perceived, yet not consciously thought about on the astral level of consciousness. The mind is a territory, not simply an exercise in thought. Thinking is a lower form of consciousness unless it becomes a psychic territory, or space that allows the mind to communicate with its source. Thought does not originate with the lower self but vibrates through its lower mental plane. This causes its coloring and creates an impression of reality unfit for higher understanding. Mind reality is infinite and enables contact with other dimensions on the etheric as well as the astral level. Death, for instance, is the ultimate contact between the astral and the physical plane, allowing the self freedom from the physical envelope to enter a parallel dimension founded by memory. Beyond death, however, consciousness is free of astral energy and enters into sympathy with levels of intelligent life that are not subservient to the human, memory-based psyche. Memory is the ultimate measure of lower thought systems, while telepathic contact with higher thought systems involves intelligence planes empowered to increase human awareness and knowledge beyond its astral perimeter. Such planes are free from subjective memory and enable the self to clearly distinguish between the astral and mental worlds. The astral connection is the enclosing perimeter of unconsciousness. Beyond it man is free, in the cosmic sense of the word. He has finally the ability to know beyond any subjective form of restraint from parallel worlds involved at different stages of the human evolutionary development. The human psyche is a time machine that informs and disinforms according to the nature of its link with astral beings. These, to serve their own purpose, hide their identity behind human symbolism in order to maintain their psychic grip on consciousness. Man does not exist by himself and for himself alone. Until he has overcome his inner ignorance of the psychic laws that determine the manner in which he sees the universe. The evolutionary development of the human mind is based on the complete grasp of the nature of thought. Until thinking is fully understood in its occult process, dreams are interpreted from an astral perception, and thought remains a subjective function of the astralized ego, disconnected from its source and serving only the soul. The self must understand the nature of his astral connection if he is to grasp the symbolic order of the dream world of which thought is the organized, rational counterpart. This will enable him to perceive the quality and depth of the mind when determined by the power of individualized thought. Thinking is not simply a reflective process. It is the medium of interdimensional communication through the mind that can be brought to the awareness of the self once he has learned to accept its supramental source. The mind gives access to its full landscape when the ego no longer feels threatened by ideas that pulse in from beyond its astral perimeter, the seat of its false identity, the personality. The astral connection is the driving force of both simple and educated ignorance. Beyond this subjective state emerges a being that can no longer live under influences that mask his reality and knowledge in order to preserve another's. When the self realizes the inner need and strength to dynamize his own individualized thought system, which can bring him out of his subjective attitudes by its compatibility with interdimensional mind levels, he will break the astral connection. The mind is not a human convenience but a psychic territory which the ego experiences through endless attitudes of which it is more or less aware. As it moves beyond self-indulged ignorance, the psyche will tune into higher mind levels. This will determine its capacity and right to know. As it gradually draws away from collective ignorance, a measure of its involutionary consciousness grafted to race memory. Evolution cannot take place through the collective process. Individual identity must eventually be regained. The astral world locks the self in a collective evolutionary cycle from which he must escape, in order to gravitate towards individuality where the mind is free to explore the many mansions of reality. In this process the self will be strengthened as he begins moving away from the astral perimeter of his consciousness. Contact with other dimensions remains a hermetic fact of life. It will grow, spread and transpire as humanity enters a new phase of awareness, its collective consciousness streamlined to allow an enhanced development of individualized intelligence. The human intellect is extremely naive, proud, pseudo-intelligent, and narrow-minded, regardless of its apparent sophistication. It has historically interfered with the full development of conscious thought. As evolutionary ideas seep through the modern and postmodern mind, open contact with other mind levels will rivet human consciousness and create, at first, great trauma, a necessary step towards establishing a new order in the science of the mind. Time is on the side of evolution once the alphabet of consciousness has been learned. The psychic control of one's destiny can only come about through control over the astral connection. The ambivalence experienced in thought must be put to rest if we are to enter into contact with, and, in psychic time, individually fuse with interdimensional intelligence. The nature of consciousness is not measurable by the intellect. This explains our difficulties in the experience of living, at all levels. We expect life to behave as we wish and it never does. For the karmic link with the astral plane has not been broken at the planetary level. We constantly gamble for the best and fear for the worst. Life is not sufficiently harmonized with the higher dimensions of the psyche to allow real self-determination and freedom. The astral connection is our passport to recurring experience rather than permanent peace. The astral connection prevents the self from living in peace because of its negative bombardment of the mind and its offsetting of the mental focus through stress-related emotions. It covers the whole range of human experience, from the time of birth to the time of death. It is a psychic trap of such power and unimaginable presence that it weakens the center of consciousness and puts life under subtle influences that gradually warp creative intelligence. The unconscious mind is overwhelmed by forces so pervasive. They create a barrage against higher consciousness, leaving the groping ego in a perpetual state of need for self-justification. The astral connection is a force to reckon with. It grows imperceptibly as the ego further disengages itself from its center. Life becomes more difficult with the passage of time. The return to a focused inner center requires a radical break with lifelong thinking habits that have paralyzed the mind through illusion, fear, and the need to believe. The mind feeds on mental impressions emotionally thwarted throughout the human experience. It cannot evolve beyond its astral limitations until it has broken free of the historical thinking patterns imposed by civilization. The mind cannot grow into an autonomous entity until it has converted its psychological knowledge into a form of psychic consciousness totally independent from the collective archetypes of humanity. The archetypes are astral symbols which effect powerful reference systems of thought and behavior, conditioning the mind to a way of thinking that serves the experiential level of soul consciousness rather than the intelligent dimensions of ego awareness. The astral connection is the experiential link with the world of the soul. Only the supramental sphere can provide the knowledge and understanding of the function of astral archetypes, used throughout the involutionary period of human history to keep man prisoner of antagonistic belief systems. The fact that archetypes exist does not make them fundamental to the mind's psychic structure. Believing them so makes us subservient to their astral meaning, and keeps us from the powerful thrust of a supramental connection with the forces of the thought adjuster that lie at the very foundation of the human thought system. The unconscious mind is inundated by the astral appetites of the soul, manifested through the subjective aspects of human knowledge inculcated since birth. Man is so dissociated from his own inner center. He has little or no ability to free himself willfully from notions that have given the human mind a subservient role in the evolution of consciousness. The astral connection imparts to the mind all the possible and imaginable material it needs emotionally to support the soul forces that coalesce into a psychic pattern deviating from reality. The psyche, when nourished from external sources, tends to absorb material along the lines of least resistance, not having the maturity to support its own inner-dimensional reality that would forcibly divorce it from its collectively induced passivity. The notion that man is an intelligent being is based on his capacity to deal with matter. Even here, his intelligence is questionable if we consider the harm he has brought to his people, not to mention his planet. As soon as he moves into more ethereal spheres, he loses his composure and is forced to identify with forms of knowledge that suit his emotional needs on a primal basis. Substantive knowledge transpires not from the rational efforts of the mind, but from the supramental composite elements that make it a universal system of communication with other levels. This will remain a hard fact to swallow as long as the intellect so ardently refuses to realize the psychic intervention of multidimensional reality in the affairs of men at all levels of their experience.